A live look at Queen's Park, where just in about 30 minutes through that door, the Premier is going to walk and the Finance Minister and the Ford government will table the 2022 Ontario budget. It comes about 1 week before the writ drops, which is when the election campaign officially kicks into gear. It's 3:30 and 10 degrees from 299 Queen Street West. This is Toronto's breaking news, CP24. Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Smythe, and welcome to our special coverage of the 2022 Ontario election. Well, it is budget day in the province, a time for the government to outline its fiscal priorities for the upcoming season, or session too, but this time the budget is happening about a week before the election campaign kicks off, which means it will not pass in the legislature before the session is dissolved. This pre-election blueprint, no doubt, has Doug Ford hoping his spending promises will secure his job and give him a second term as Premier. And CP24 has learned one of the new items in the budget, and it's a tax credit for workers that earn less than $50,000 per year. Currently, 1 million people receive a tax break, first announced in 2019. But now the Ford government is expanding that bracket to those earning $50,000, about another 700,000 people. Now, joining us live now is our political panel, Adrian Batra, editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun, Alvin, former Liberal leadership candidate, and Kemma Joseph, political strategist at Crestview Strategies. I want to thank you all for being with us here today. And I want to first ask you, put your hand up if you think that this is a costed election platform and not a budget.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So everybody's sort of in agreement here. You know what? Let's start with you, Adrian. You know, already the Premier has pre-election promises that add up to more than $10 billion. Is there anything left to announce today?
Mm-hmm. Well, now we've heard the dribs and drabs of the tax cut, for example. I think that was one that they were hanging on to. I think we can all agree that this is the official launch of the campaign, as the House will rise tonight once this budget is announced. Steph, all the leaders will be out campaigning this weekend. They already have been for the most part. But, you know, it's an eye-watering price tag for the provincial budget. The Ford government feels that they have costed it out. This is reasonable and affordable for Ontarians, and this is what they are going to go to the people of Ontario with. This will be their plan for the next 30-plus days during the election. They feel that they have provided a sort of...
Okay, Adrian froze for a moment, and we are going to wait till she comes back, get right back to Adrian. But in the meantime, let's go to Alvin, former Liberal leadership candidate, to talk about your take. Alvin, what do you think needs to be in this announcement today? We are dealing with, what, inflation now? You know, affordability is a big question. Housing in the province. What notes do you think need to be hit in this budget if it's going to be going forward as that platform?
Well, like you mentioned, Stephanie, this isn't a budget, right? This is a taxpayer-funded campaign announcement in terms of what the Ford PC party is putting out there for the election. So that's what it actually is. If this Ford government really wanted to deliver a budget, they would have followed their own law that they changed at the last minute and delivered the budget in March. Right? And they would have had 2 months to actually pass the budget and demonstrate to the people of Ontario this is what they were going to do. So, you know, I don't hold a lot of hope that this budget is going to have any real substance to it other than campaign promises that the Premier is essentially holding Ontarians hostage with in order to get those things delivered. He had a chance to deliver on those things as the government. He chose not to. I'd like to see things like details in terms of how much the 413 or the Brantford bypass is actually going to cost, or how are they going to support parents who missed out on thousands of dollars of federal funding for childcare because the Premier sat on his hands. I don't think we're going to see those things. Okay,
and let's bring in Kemma. Kemma, you are a government relations strategist. And what kind of advice would you be giving the Premier right now with this budget slash, platform announcement today in terms of trying to hang on to what he achieved in the last election?
I think he's already doing it in terms of what I would provide in terms of advice, which is really, how about you use this budget to tell Ontarians what you've worked on in the past 4 years? I think this is more, to Alvin's point, less about new initiatives that Ontarians actually or possibly may need, but more in terms of sticking to their key messaging. They're building better. They're building stuff, whether it's highways or hospitals or new long-term cares. It's very in line with what the Conservatives have been like their rhetoric for the past 4 years. So it's just following their path and ensuring that they're focused on it and really pushing the opposition to almost have to disagree with what they're saying. Are you against creating more highways for the GTA? No? Then you need to vote for us. I think they're already creating that wedge issue right at the start of the election.
Right, and let's talk, Alvin, about Del Duca, the Liberal leader. And, recently we've heard of some polls that have been pretty favorable for the Liberals and for the leader. What do you think? How can Del Duca break through here and become a formidable opponent to the Premier?
As they say, the only poll that matters is the one on election day. It is obviously promising for the Ontario Liberals that they're within striking distance right now. And that's good. That's good because it shows that we have a competitive opposition and a competitive party that can really challenge the Ford PCs to be the next government. And that gives people a clear choice, right? There's a clear choice between Liberals and Conservatives right now in terms of their plan for the future. The Ontario Liberal Party has already announced a number of proposals, including the economic dignity proposal that it talks about wage transparency, increasing the minimum wage, support for gig workers, creating transferable benefits. All those things are great in terms of a contrast to this Ford government that hasn't delivered on those things. And I think Stephen has done a great job starting to introduce himself and getting people to know who he is and what he believes in. And I think he's presented a great alternative to the Premier right now.
And Kemma, when Mr. Del Duca stands up following this budget, what kind of note does he need to hit then to get some attention away from the finance minister, from the Premier, to get his voice heard on criticizing the government?
I don't know that he needs to focus on the Premier. I think he needs to distance himself from Andrea Horwath. I don't know that I agree with what Alvin just said in terms of people getting to know him. I think he's still relatively unknown to most Ontarians. Ontarians are not really paying attention to the election. The election hasn't started yet, so he'll have to make sure that people are understanding that he's a clear choice as in opposition to Andrea Horwath. If you don't want to vote for the Conservatives, then who is the other person you may want to vote for? I think most people are thinking of Andrea Horwath. I think he needs to really distinguish himself against her and let the Premier be the Premier.
Do you think, Alvin, it's kind of challenging for the Liberals right now with the Premier coming up with potentially some announcements that are going to be helpful, with especially this one with another tax break for workers that was leaked or we broke yesterday, right? Another people earning under $50,000 a year getting up to $300 more in their pockets.
You're right. I don't think it'll be difficult for the Liberals because I think Ontarians see that these are tools that the government is using to buy people's votes, right? I mean, clearly with the rebates for license plates, everybody has seen them. Everybody has gotten those checks.
Did you enjoy that check when it came in the mail?
Everybody enjoyed that, but people donated it to their parties and people donated it to the movements that they believe in. But the Financial Accountability Office said it's going to cost the Ontario government over $6 billion within 5 years. So these are things that are continuing to happen, and these are things that Liberals are going to point out. But I think just to talk about the last point in terms of electability and the difference between Andrea and Stephen is that when the NDP were up, when they won as many seats as they did in the last election, they didn't beat a single Conservative incumbent. They didn't win any seats from the Conservatives. They only won those from Liberals. So Liberals are the party that has the opportunity to really defeat the government and do better.
Okay, with that, Alvin and Kemma, we're going to take a quick break. You're watching Toronto's Breaking News, CP24. Stay with us. We'll have more special coverage of the Ontario budget coming up after the break. All right, welcome back to our special coverage of the Ontario budget, set to be tabled in just a short time at 4 o'clock. Joining us live, our political panel. Adrienne Batra is no longer frozen, and she is the editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun. Alvin Tedjo, former Liberal leadership candidate, and Kemma Joseph, political strategist at Crestview Strategies. Let's start with Adrienne. I'm sorry you got cut off there a little earlier, Adrienne. We were talking about the flurry of Ontario government announcements that have come just ahead of the budget, or this platform, maybe a cost election platform, however you want to call it. And Andrea Horwath is on the record as saying that this is just nothing more than a signal that it's the campaign for Ontario has begun. And we also know Stephen Del Duca saying, Del Duca said that rather. Horwath says, the system is on its knees and things have to be fixed. So how does the Premier address all this, or the Finance Minister, Mr. Bethlen Falvey, going forward, making everybody happy, or how much do they care?
Well, the Ford government hasn't been shy about spending money. And so that is going to be an interesting sort of counter argument for the Liberals and the NDP. They are announcing new funding for hospitals. They are announcing tax reductions for low-income Ontarians. Of course, they are all about affordability and development and growth and construction. So how does the NDP and the Liberals come out against that? So from that sort of pure political perspective, it's an interesting argument that the Ford government is putting forward. How do you oppose certain aspects of that? So what the Ford government, Ford campaign, frankly, is going to be looking at are those big development programs, such as building those hospitals, making those investments, building subways, and and expanding our transit system. There will be aspects that they're going to talk about with respect to housing affordability. Just hearkening back to the federal budget that we just had a few weeks ago, Steph, there are a number of initiatives that are going to be put on the provincial government from the federal government in terms of housing affordability. So there's a lot on the table. So they're going to be looking at, those pocketbook issues and helping the affordability aspect for Ontarians. That's the case that they're going to make in the next 30 plus days.
Right. And Alvin, Del Duca said that the election is a choice between the Ford Conservatives' bad decisions that favor the biggest and the richest and their Liberal plan to ensure Ontario is a place to grow. Talk about those bad decisions that Mr. Del Duca is referring to.
Well, and I think it goes to Adrian's point that, this government now has a record, right? So the PC party is running on a record, and so they can say all the nice things that they want. The question is, why haven't they done it? And why didn't they do it this time when they were supposed to release a budget 2 months ago and actually start implementing those things? This is, again, just a platform document, and you can talk about the things that they haven't invested in. They're talking about investing in hospitals, except Scarborough still is the lowest funded hospital system in the entire province. They've had 4 years to address that, and, Premier Ford loves to talk about how much he loves the people of Scarborough, but he hasn't delivered. They're talking about school funding, and they want to invest more in schools. Well, we could take the money that they're investing and putting into the 413 that nobody wants, including everybody in those communities, and put those into the schools. And that's a plan that Mr. Del Duca has proposed. So there's a lot of contrast here in terms of what the Ford government has done, their record, what they're trying to do, and where the Liberals have positioned themselves to actually say, we're going to do this instead. And we've actually got a record of delivering on these things as well.
Right. And Kemma, when you look at what's coming today and all the promises that have been, or the announcements that have been made already, do you think that they're striking a broad enough group? To Alvin's point, not so much. Like I was saying earlier, there's things that impact people who own vehicles. Well, not everybody does. You have transit situation, you have inflation. How does that balance get struck?
I think they're really trying to talk to their core base, the people who have voted Conservative in the past. I think they're focusing again on the majority of people who are saying that they like the Premier, that they are in favor with what he's suggesting. I will say I think he is not, however, getting the progressive vote, people who are probably asking for more programs, services. It's great that you are building roads and infrastructure in schools, but what about programs for the most vulnerable people, for racialized people? What about housing for Indigenous people? I think there's a bit of lack of nuance there. But again, he's not trying to, I don't think he's trying to capture everyone. I think he's trying to capture enough people to win a majority in the next 35 days.
So what would you advise the government not to do?
What I would advise for them to not do?
To hang on to what they have, right? If you think they're speaking to their base,
absolutely. Absolutely. You currently have a majority. Your sole purpose is to regain that majority once again. You are at the top. You are a strong incumbent. I think when you're at the top, the only way is for you to go down. So absolutely stay the line and focus on getting all your 63 seats.
Right. Adrian, let's talk about the Financial Accountability Office. It predicted this month that the deficit is going to be eliminated as early as next year because saying the shortfalls are going to end in 2023-24 and budget surpluses of $7.1 billion by 23-24. And that is in thanks a lot to the federal government transfers during COVID. It's funny that on the one hand, COVID was so paralyzing for this province, for the world, but on the other hand, it has given, I guess, a sense of a windfall for the Ford government.
Well, it just goes to show you the resiliency of the Canadian economy, and the majority of which is in this great province of Ontario. And both levels of government, Ontario government and the federal government, are benefiting from the additional tax revenue that's come in, the quick bounce back. Let's not forget, a lot of taxpayers' money was spent during the course of the 2.5+ years. So just by virtue of the fact that the province of Ontario could potentially be on course to see some of that deficit come down is positive. And for all the things that my colleagues are saying on the panel with respect to the various investments in different communities and whatnot, those are all dollars and revenues that are there to do those sorts of things. But it's a matter of the priority and whether or not the Ford government has the impetus to say, all right, well, we've got this $8 billion surplus. Are we going to pay down debt, or are we going to take that money and build new schools? Are we going to, in addition to the billions that they've already spent in the education system, for example, are we going to then put more on top of that? So it's important to look at the priority. The devil will always be in the details, as we all know. But everything that we've seen, and even if we go back to the last, to the 2018 election stuff, we know that Premier Ford, Doug Ford, as a candidate, is relatable to people. He's very friendly. As Nick Nano said, probably one of the best retail politicians in this country at this current time. People actually believe him when he makes a commitment. And so it's really about that notion of making the commitment, whether it be in education, healthcare, infrastructure, creating jobs, and then actually executing it over the course of the next 4 years, let's say, if they get reelected.
Right. And Alvin, when you look at Mr. Del Duca, do you often wonder, hey, how can you become the retail politician that Doug Ford is, and kind of, take away from this government that he's been able to manage, and just the way that he's able to relate with the public?
Yeah, I mean, like the premier's folksy, attitude and relatability is one thing, and maybe trusting him on the first initial pass to follow through on his promises is one thing, but has he delivered on those things? How many broken promises has this government had? How many times have they said they were going to do one thing and then did the other? For the perfect example of saying when this budget was supposed to be passed, he passed a law saying that this budget needed to be passed in March, and he didn't do that. He undid it so he didn't have to pay a fine.
But that's
right?
not unprecedented, right? Like Kathleen Wynne has done that before. No, it's not.
But I mean, but then that's showing you that he's like other politicians that he decries all the time. But when we're talking about the windfall in terms of what's in the budget, he didn't spend $4 billion in COVID pandemic relief funds that the federal government gave them. That has been sitting there instead of being used to, staff up our hospitals or fight the pandemic in a better way to save lives and to strengthen the system. Right? He left $1 billion on the table by giving everybody these license plates refunds, and he cost parents thousands of dollars, which the Liberals have promised to repay, because he delayed the child care agreement that every other province and every other territory in the country had over the last year.
But he does say it's the best child care agreement in the country for Ontario.
It's not any different than it is in any other province. It's 1 year extended. It's the same amount of money, and the government was going to do that anyway for all the other provinces. So, he sat on his hands. He says he got a better deal, but the honest to God truth is that he didn't.
Kemma, let's talk about that retail politician that Adrian was mentioning with Doug Ford, and then Del Duca, the relatively unknown, and Andrea Horwath, who's been, it seems, around forever. How do they tap into that? I'm talking about Del Duca and Horwath because it is a strong asset for the Premier.
With Andrea Horwath, I'm actually pausing and I'm actually asking myself the same question. She's been a politician in the House for at least 2009, for a decade almost. I think people only know her as the opposition. The NDP has unfortunately missed key moments to, like Alvin mentioned earlier, to really capitalize and enable themselves to be government. I think for Stephen Del Duca, he has then a great opportunity to displace Andrea Horwath as the leader of the opposition to then become an alternative to the Premier. I think it's really his time to assert himself, introduce himself to Ontarians, and also say, hey, if you don't want to vote for Premier or for Doug Ford, you can vote for me instead.
Sorry, you're cutting out a little bit there, Kemma. I'm going to pitch it over to Adrian for a minute. We've been hearing that, this budget is going to be about rebuilding pillars of the economy after 2 years of the pandemic. So, you know, Adrian, we have seen a lot of announcements already, but, oh, and there we can barely see in the distance the Finance Minister and the Premier. There they are. We've got a long shot of Premier Ford and Minister Betham Falvey as the bells toll, or the buzzer tolls, to get into the legislature, whatever the official wording is for that. So rebuilding the economy after 2 years of the pandemic is going to be a theme. Also, affordability is a theme. You know, what are the ways to tackle that beyond, you know, the tax break that's going to put, you know, $300 in somebody's pocket, either who earns $50,000 a year, or beyond the licensing? You know, what are the key strategies for the rebuild that they're talking about?
Well, let's not discount the money that's actually going back into Ontarians' pockets. That matters right now, with everything costing so much more. So I don't think that that's an insignificant thing. But with respect to the overarching, you know, tone that we're going to see from this government and see today, is about the rebuild, the infrastructure, the hospital investments, the investments in the economy. Job creation is going to be key, and where we need all those jobs, what sectors they're going to be coming from, and how we're going to, you know, get people from training to job to paying taxes to being part of the economy is what we're expecting to hear right now.
And Alvin, these are uncertain times, right? We're dealing with inflation. We're dealing with, you know, the cost of living is going to go, you know, the interest rates on the way up as well. Concerns about affordability and housing and all those things. As you can see, the live shot as they're applauding the Finance Minister and the Premier as they walk into the legislature, sitting down, and we'll go to that in just a couple of seconds. But, you know, is affordability primary in people's minds?
I think affordability is the #1 issue on voters' minds, and they're going to be comparing these plans, this platform that he's announcing as the budget, the platforms of the other parties, to sort of really say who's looking out for them. And it needs to be more than slogans, because we know that the Premier is good at delivering slogans. He's good at the sound bites and making people, you know, see his folksy charm. But there needs to be real substance behind that. There needs to be real action. And I think the fact that they delayed this as much as they did is showing that it's more about politics and less about people. And that's concerning for me, and I hope the people of Ontario see through it.
All right, I guess they're handing out the budget document now in the Ontario legislature. And Kemma, speaking again about what lies ahead, and Alvin touched on it as well, how sort of disingenuous he feels it is that this is happening. It's not, you know, the budget isn't even going to be passed. It's going to be basically that blueprint to go into the election. Do you think people really care about that, right? Or do they just want to hear the bottom line?
I don't think that people care or would have really noticed that the budget hasn't been voted. I don't think people really are really bugged down with the process. This is actually a referendum on the province or on the Ford government. So if you disagree with him not voting for the budget and using it as a platform, then you can vote him out of government. I think the technicalities are kind of lost on the regular people or just the common person in Ontario. This is seen as a referendum. It's up to you to decide who the next government is.
Absolutely.
And sorry,
they care about the Raptors right now.
I wasn't going to say that.
Frankly, they care about the Raptors right now, and you know, I'm not trying to be crass about it, but you know, those of us that are discussing this right now, of course, we know the importance of it, the significance of a provincial budget, and all the ongoing implications of what we're going to hear today. It's very important, but for the average Ontarian right now, at this moment, they're not focused on this.
Let's go to this stunning moment, Adrian Batra. Thank you.